Hello, today I want to show you how to create a two-column layout web page using HTML and CSS styles to do this layout and position the different items. So what we're going to end up with is something looking like this. Basically, two-column layout with a header, a footer, well, the main container, which encompasses everything, and then two columns in the middle that are side by side. So I'm going to show you how to get these two columns in the middle side by side and then get the footer to be anchored to the bottom. So we're going to go over to Dreamweaver now, and we're going to create a new HTML page. And then this here, now we're going to save it. I'll save it in a folder on my desktop. I'm going to just create a new folder called two-column layout, and I will name this index.html. So here we go. So I'm working with my split view in Dreamweaver, code on the left, design view on the right, and once again for the title, we can give it a title over here, so I'll just call it two-column layout just to be a little bit more complete. Column layout. Okay. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create these boxes, and remember the structure ends up in the body section of our web page. Those are the building blocks, and then we're going to put the styles to actually position everything, give it width and height and background colors in the top. This is going to be a layout, a simple one where we're not going to be using pictures or anything. It's just to show the basic grid of how to create this layout, so we will be employing background colors just to see it visually and heights. So here in the body, we're going to start building this web page. We're going to use div tags. If you're using HTML5, a lot of these div tags have been replaced with native element names such as header. You no longer have to say div ID equals header. You can just say header and close that element tag. But in this tutorial, I will do it with div tags because it kind of covers the new and the old, if you understand that concept, that some of the element names have been updated to the most common ones to be already included in the HTML language. So we're going to start here creating our container, div ID, an ID selector equals, in between quotation marks, container. And we're going to close this. So this is our main box that we see here that appears right here that represents this. I'm going to just put a little comment to indicate what div this closes and container. So I don't get confused at the end when I have a bunch of divs like div, 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 div. I'm like, oh, what's what? If I have 5 divs at the end and I can't figure out what closes what, then at least these little comments give me an indication of the balance of these tag names. So here is my container. If I were to preview in browser right now, I wouldn't see anything because I haven't styled it. So I need to go up into the head, anywhere in between the opening and the closing tag of the head. I'll put it right below the title here. And I will start the styles for this container. So let me just start style, type, to identify what it is. So I'm dealing with CSS. And I'm going to close that. So all of my styles for anything that I'm building down here are going to be placed in between the opening and closing style tags at the top in the head. So we're going to start with this name. So I'm going to style this container. Since it's an ID selector, I need to use the hashtag or the pound symbol because it's a unique box, and anytime you see ID, the style begins with this symbol here. So container has to, the names have to match perfectly. The way I write it down here is the way it has to be written up here. Same case, if I have a uppercase C, it has to have uppercase C up here. It cannot be varied or else it'll think it's something completely different. So opening and closing brackets. And in here, I'm going to give it a width of, I'll put it to 960 pixels, no space between the 960 and the pixels. And I will give it a background color. Background color of, say, light gray, semicolon. And now I should see, oh, okay, so we have the width, but let me give it a height so you can actually see it a little bit better. So I will actually give it a height. I'll give it a height of 768 for now, 768 pixels. Okay, And so if I were to preview this in my browser, I will see this gray box. There's still a little bit of space around to the top here. That's because I have not set my margins for the actual body to 0, which I can do. And I can also center this box. Remember, if you put the margins on the left and the right-hand side for this container box to auto. So you're saying that the space on either side is automatically set depending on how wide your browser window is open. So here now, for container, I will set my margin. I'm going to use a little shorthand notation instead of saying margin top 0, margin right auto, margin bottom 0, and margin left auto. I can kind of compact it all into one line where the 0 is going to stand for the margins top and bottom space, and then auto is going to stand for the margins on the left and the right hand side. So with that, I'm going to preview it. So it's been centered. So if my browser is a little bit smaller, it always stays in the middle no matter what. Okay, so the other thing I'm going to do is eliminate that little space to the top. This is just a little detail, and that I'm going to target my body tag. And I'm just going to set all the margins to 0. So, and I'll show you how that looks. Save. Ta-da! All right. So now, I've been just typing everything here, but recall that from the time that you identify which element you are styling, and you just write it here with the opening and closing brackets, you can always continue to style it on the right-hand side in your CSS styles all. Make sure that this style little arrow is pointed down so you can see what you have, and you can just double-click and then type in the styles for the different properties that you want to, say for example the container, the width and height's down here, you can do that there. I'm just doing it on the left hand side just because it's a little faster to go through, and then they give me code hints, so it kind of helps me type along and helps you to learn a little bit better if anything. Okay, so here we have our container. Now inside of our container we want to have a header, navigation, main, footer. Now, what happens is that when we actually write these things out in HTML, the HTML gets stacked all one on top of the other. So there's no the nav here, and then you try to put the main on the right-hand side to make it left and right. You just put it all in terms of what comes in the order first to the last, one on top of the other. So we have a header, followed by navigation, followed by main, followed by the footer. So we're going to do that here. And you're just going to end up with basic boxes, as we did, going all the way across, if we do nothing else, one on top of the other. So inside of the container, I'm going to include div id equals header, little comment, so that is my header box. I'll just put content for header. There we go. Let's just build them all first. So after that is the navigation. Nav. For nav. So now, actually, before I proceed, okay, there you go. You see now it ends up like the next box right underneath it, and it goes all the way from the left to the right, filling in the 960 pixel width of the entire container. So I will then do the next one. Div id equals main. Close that. Main. That's the main box that just showed up right here, and then the last one is our footer. next one. So now, until we actually do styles, they all just boxes that stack one on top of the other within this container box here. And they're only getting their height just from the text that's inside of it, and nothing would really be visible other than the text going one on top of the other if I preview in the browser right now. So if I preview it, that's all you see. You don't actually see any boxes. But there are boxes to be built. So we're going to start off with our header box here, and we're going to give it a style. And we're going to, first of all, give it a height. I'll give it a height of 100 pixels, or something random. So there you go, you see it's starting to space out. That's 100 pixels. You can see here, it'll indicate it when I click on this. Gives some little indication of the properties. You see ID is header, height is 100 pixels. And I'm going to give it background color. I'll give it a darker gray, semicolon. There we go, and we see that. Now for our navigation, in order for these two to end up side by side, you see by default they go all the way across, taking up the entire 960 pixel space. I can say that I want my navigation column to have, say, maybe 300 pixels, you know, some value that's less than 960 because that's the entire container width. And then I will have the main box take up the rest of that space. So say 960 minus 300 pixels. If that takes up 300, then this will take up 660 pixels. So back in Dreamweaver, for my navigation, I can say I want it to have a, I'll just give it a height so we can first see it. Actually, I'll give it a height. Yeah, I'll give it a height so that we can see it. Something not too high, just so that we can see it within the screen real estate that we have. So 500 pixels. So you see it's pushed everything else down, but it's still taking the entire width. And I'm going to give it a background color so you can see for now. Let's make it this color. There we go. So that is my navigation. I still haven't changed the width as yet, but I'll show you what's going to happen with main and nav with their width and how they end up side by side rather than one on top of the other. Okay, so I'll just give it a width for now. So I'll give it that 300 pixel width. Okay, and you see here, this is that navigation color. This light gray is the color coming through from the container's background color, that light gray that we had, that CCC initially. So now my main box after this, I want it to also have a height. I'll give it the same height so they're equal in height, and then I'll give it the remainder of the width that 960 minus 300 pixels, so which is 660 pixels. So here, main. I'll give it a height of that was 500 pixels. And I will give it a width of 660 pixels. And the background color, I'll give it any color, this blue, the complementary color, and there it is. So now, here is this box right here. It ends up right below because I haven't floated them as yet. So to preview it, you'll see that this is my navigation box, this is the main box, but I don't want it down here. I want this box to end up in this space over here. And so in order for them to end up side by side, I have to put a float on both of these. So since I want them to end up next to each other, I'm going to float both of them to the left. So what happens is they try to go up and to the left, both of them. So for my navigation, I will add in a float to the left. And that was already there. And then this one here, by default, will also float to the left. Anything that comes after it will always try to float until you say don't float anymore by clearing the float. So for this main one, I will also put the float left. So these two are floating. And now lastly, we're going to give our footer a style. But what's going to happen until we clear the float, the footer is going to probably disappear because it ends up kind of floating off to the top until you actually say clear the float. So for this one here, our footer, I will give it a height of 100 pixels again, and a background color of, say, red. So we can just see it. Now what happens, we don't see it. So the problem is that it's since we haven't cleared the float, it's basically hidden somewhere up here that we can't see it. So in order to actually see it, we have to clear that left float. So we have to say clear left. And when we do that, there is the footer down here. Now this container, since I'd initially set the height to 768 pixels, you see that it's locked in at 768 pixels, and we're seeing this gray, which is actually the background color from the container. So I can just delete this, because it was just to have a starting point. And now that container fits snugly around all of the content. So if I go preview this in browser, save, there is my two-column layout with header and footer. So remember that any item that is supposed to go in one of these sections can then just be targeted by putting the content in between the opening and closing tag for that box that you have. One thing I just want to show you in terms of where this float is found in this visual mode over here. So if I were to double click on main, and if I went to box, you'll see I have the dimensions here with height and float, and clear is also here. So here for clear, we have the options to clear the left float. If I had a right float on it, or if I had both, I can do that as well. So this is where it's found in the CSS rule style definitions under the category of box. So that is it for a two-column layout. Pretty straightforward. It's just a matter of practice and you will get it. Thank you.